sound came first. Not the roar people expected, not the thunderous chest beat that usually drew cheers from the viewing deck, but a dull, unnatural thud. Heavy, final. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in a place built for spectacle and safety. For a split second, no one reacted. The crowd at the zoo froze in a shared moment of confusion, as if their minds were struggling to match what their eyes had just seen with what they believed was possible. Children who had been laughing seconds earlier went silent. A man lowered his phone halfway through recording. Somewhere behind the glass, a woman whispered, "Did he just fall Baraka?" The giant silverback who ruled the enclosure like a living monument lay on his side in the dirt. Moments earlier, he had been everything people came to see, towering, powerful, indestructible. He had climbed to the highest artificial rock sunlight, catching the silver along his back chest, swelling as he beat it once, in a display that sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. Cameras lifted. Applause followed. He was the embodiment of strength. Then his knees buckled. At first it looked like a slip, an awkward misstep that would be corrected in a heartbeat. But the heartbeat never came. His massive frame tilted unbalanced and crashed to the ground with a force that vibrated through the concrete barriers and into the chests of everyone watching. This time the silence didn't last. Gasps broke out across the deck. A child started crying. Parents instinctively pulled their kids closer, as if distance alone could protect them from whatever had just gone wrong. Baraka didn't move. His chest rose once, shallow and uneven, then stilled again. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Inside the enclosure, the other gorillas felt it before the humans did. The usual background rhythm of the troop's soft grunts, shifting bodies, the rustle of leaves stopped instantly. A young male took a cautious step forward, then froze uncertain. A female near the back let out a sharp, anxious call and retreated into the brush. No one approached Baraka at first. He was the constant, the anchor, the one who never fell. On the other side of the glass, the keepers reacted at last. Radios crackled to life. A senior veterinarian's voice cut through the control room, tight and controlled but unmistakably alarmed medical emergency in the gorilla habitat. Silverback down. Heart rate data from Baraka's tracking band flashed onto a monitor, numbers, stuttering in patterns no one wanted to see. Erratic. Weak. Alarms blinked red. Someone swore under their breath. Another keeper whispered, "Please move. Please just move." But Baraka didn't. As seconds stretched into something heavier, something darker, the unease in the air shifted into fear. Not the loud, panicked kind, but the quiet kind that settles in your stomach when you realize you're watching the beginning of something you might not want to finish. Then slowly something changed. A large female stepped forward. She didn't rush. She didn't vocalize. She simply moved with purpose and lay down beside Baraka, pressing her body against his, as if anchoring him to the earth. She placed one palm on his chest, feeling for something, movement, warmth, life. Another gorilla approached and stood tall near his back, eyes fixed on the glass, watching the humans beyond it with a steady, unblinking stare. The troop began to reposition, not away from Baraka, toward him. Juveniles backed into a loose semicircle, forming a living barrier. One older adolescent climbed onto a rock, scanning the enclosure's perimeter. Another brushed leaves from Baraka's fur with movements so careful they looked almost ceremonial. It wasn't chaos, it wasn't panic, it was order. From the viewing deck, people watched in stunned silence. No one cheered now. No one filmed for entertainment. Phones were held lower, hands trembling. A woman covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears she didn't fully understand. A man murmured, "They're protecting him." Inside the control room, the staff hesitated. Protocol was clear. When a dominant male collapses, the troop becomes unpredictable. Secure the enclosure, distract the animals, regain control. But nothing in the manuals covered this deliberate, coordinated response. Fruit was tossed into the far corner as a distraction. Not a single gorilla turned their head. They didn't even look. Baraka's mate let out a long, low sound, deep, mournful, controlled. It wasn't a cry of panic, it was a signal. The kind that carries meaning older than language. Baraka twitched just barely. A weak groan escaped his throat. "He's still alive," someone whispered. Minutes passed, then more. The crowd had been cleared away now, ushered back behind emergency barriers. The zoo felt eerily empty, as if the world had narrowed to this one enclosure, this one fallen giant, this one impossible moment. Baraka's breathing grew shallower, and still no one human or otherwise could reach him. The gorillas held their formation, eyes alert, bodies tense but controlled, guarding something precious that the humans on the other side of the glass could only watch. The realization crept in, slowly chilling and undeniable. If help didn't come soon, Baraka might die right there in front of everyone. And if that happened, nothing, no protocol, no explanation, no comforting words would ever make this moment forgettable. This was no longer just an accident. It was the beginning of something that would challenge everything people thought they understood about power instinct and what happens when a leader falls and the ones who love him refuse to let go. For the first few seconds after Baraka fell, the troop didn't seem to know what to do. That hesitation, brief, fragile, was the last trace of panic. A young male let out a sharp, uncertain call, the sound cracking as it echoed against the concrete walls. Another shifted his weight nervously, muscles coiled, ready either to flee or to charge. The air vibrated with tension, the kind that usually explodes into chaos when a silverback goes down. But it didn't. Instead, the fear folded inward and transformed. The large female, who had already placed herself beside Baraka, adjusted her position, aligning her body with his chest, as if shielding the weakest point. Her breathing slowed, deliberately, exaggerated, steady. She pressed her palm flat against his rib cage, feeling for rhythm, for reassurance. There was none she could feel clearly, and still she stayed. Another adult approached from the opposite side and stood tall, shoulders, squared eyes locked on the glass. His posture wasn't aggressive, it was watchful. A warning without a threat. The message was clear. Something here matters more than you. The juveniles, usually restless and impulsive, backed away from the center and formed a wide arc. Not tight enough to provoke fear, not loose enough to invite intrusion. An instinctive perimeter. They glanced at one another, syncing movements without a sound. One climbed onto a ledge. Another crouched low near the ground, alert, scanning. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was defense. On the other side of the barrier, the humans struggled to keep up with what they were witnessing. Radios buzzed with clipped instructions, voices overlapping, urgency rising. The senior veterinarian's jaw tightened as she watched the monitors. Baraka's heart rate spiked, then dipped dangerously low. His oxygen levels flickered. "We need to get in there," someone said. "We can't," another replied. "They won't let us." The gorillas had closed ranks. Any sudden movement from the staff side was met with synchronized shifts, heads turning, bodies, angling, eyes narrowing. It was not aggression, but it was unmistakably control. A clear boundary drawn by instinct, older than steel gates and protocols. Minutes dragged on. Baraka's chest rose, then fell shallow and uneven. His fingers twitched once, then went still. The female beside him let out a low vibrating hum, steady, repetitive, almost like a chant. She leaned closer, brushing leaves away from his face, clearing his airway without knowing that was what she was doing. The tension climbed higher. A keeper tried again, tossing food farther away, hoping hunger or curiosity would break the formation. No one moved. Not a glance, not a step. Food meant nothing right now. From the viewing area beyond the emergency barriers, the few remaining witnesses stood frozen. No one spoke. No one filmed anymore. A man wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, staring as if afraid that looking away might be the moment everything ended. Inside the control room, the realization began to sink in with unsettling clarity. "They're not panicking," the veterinarian murmured. "They're organizing." The words felt wrong, even as she said them, because organization implied intention, planning, care. Another keeper leaned closer to the screen. "Look at the rotations," he said quietly. They watched the replay. Every few minutes, one gorilla would step back, another would move in. One guarding, one grooming, one watching the perimeter. No overlap, no crowding, no fighting for position. It was a system, and at the center of it all, Baraka lay motionless. The fear shifted again, this time from chaos to something heavier, the fear of loss. The female at his side pressed her forehead gently against his shoulder, then lifted her head and released a mournful sound that cut through the enclosure. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo dramatically, but it carried weight and the troop responded instantly. Every gorilla froze listening. Baraka groaned. It was faint, barely audible, but it was enough. The female stiffened, hope flaring like a spark. She touched his chest again, this time firmer, as if urging him back. A juvenile crept closer, tugged at his massive hand, then retreated when there was no response. The crowd's collective breath caught. "He's still here," someone whispered. But how long was the question no one could answer? The veterinarian's hands hovered over the console fingers, trembling despite years of experience. She had handled tranquilizers, surgeries, emergencies that had gone wrong in seconds. None of that prepared her for this, watching a patient die slowly, while those closest to him stood guard, refusing to abandon him. "We can't wait," she said finally, voice tight. If his heart stops before she could finish, a sudden sound cut through the enclosure. A young gorilla climbed higher into the structure and vocalized sharply, 3 short bursts followed by a long, sustained call. The pattern repeated, deliberate, urgent. Another juvenile echoed it from the opposite side. The veterinarian's eyes widened. "That's not alarm," she said. "That's signaling." "For what?" a keeper asked. She swallowed. "For us." As if to confirm it, one of the juveniles turned toward the glass and held the gaze. Not a challenge, not fear, expectation. "They're telling us something," the keeper murmured. Baraka's breathing faltered again. The hum from the female deepened, becoming rhythmic. She pressed her palm against his chest and began applying gentle pressure over and over with careful timing. Not frantic, not random. The control room fell silent. "She's trying to help him breathe," someone whispered. The fear crystallized into something sharp and unbearable. If they failed him now, if they misread this moment, the loss wouldn't just be Baraka's. It would be something larger. A trust broken, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The veterinarian closed her eyes for half a second, steadying herself. "They're afraid to lose him," she said softly. "And they're not wrong to be." Inside the enclosure, the troop held its ground, bodies tense, eyes bright with urgency and grief. Panic had passed. Tension remained coiled tight as wire. What stood in its place was something far more dangerous. The possibility that love alone might not be enough to save him, and the terror of what would happen if it wasn't. What looked like chaos from the outside was anything but. As the minutes stretched and Baraka remained on the ground, the enclosure did not dissolve into fear or violence. Instead, something quieter took hold, an order so subtle it could only be seen if you stopped expecting animals to behave like animals and started watching them as a family under pressure. The first sign was timing. Every movement inside the troop began to fall into rhythm. No gorilla rushed. No one crowded Baraka's body. When one individual leaned too close, another shifted just enough to restore balance. The space around the fallen silverback was preserved with care, as if invisible lines had been drawn and respected. Amal, Baraka's mate, remained at his side, but she was no longer frantic. Her earlier distress had sharpened into focus. She adjusted her position so her body shielded his head from direct sun, her broad back casting a patch of shade that moved with the light. When a breeze stirred dust toward his face, she reached out and brushed it away, slow and deliberate. Across from her, another adult male stood sentinel. He did not posture or beat his chest. He simply faced outward, weight, evenly distributed eyes tracking every movement beyond the glass. When a keeper shifted position in the control room, the gorilla's gaze followed. When someone raised a hand too suddenly, his shoulders tightened, then relaxed once the threat passed. This was not aggression, it was assessment. The juveniles surprised everyone most. The ones who usually chased and tumbled through the habitat now held still, watching, learning. 2 older juveniles took elevated positions on rocks and platforms, not playing, not posturing, but scanning. Lookouts. The youngest sat quietly near the brush fingers, curled around a twig, eyes fixed on Baraka's chest as if willing it to rise. Inside the control room, Leah leaned closer to the monitor, her breath shallow. "They've divided roles," she said under her breath. No one contradicted her. On the screen, Baraka's chest lifted weakly, then paused. Amal responded instantly, pressing her palm to his sternum, adjusting the pressure based on the movement beneath her hand. She leaned down, vocalizing softly, a sound too low for the visitors to hear, but strong enough to vibrate through his body. The sound wasn't frantic. It was steady. Leah felt a chill move through her. She had heard similar rhythms before in neonatal wards and emergency rooms, in moments when panic had to be suppressed in favor of precision. The gorilla wasn't reacting randomly. She was regulating herself so she could regulate him. Time slipped into a strange suspension. Security had cleared the public from view, but the cameras continued to roll. Somewhere outside the zoo, the footage was already spreading, stripped of context, framed as spectacle. Inside the enclosure, none of that mattered. What mattered was the shallow rise and fall of Baraka's chest and the silent agreement among the troop that he would not be left alone. A junior keeper whispered, "Why aren't they fighting for dominance?" Leah didn't answer immediately. She replayed the last 10 minutes again, her eyes catching details she had missed the first time. Every gorilla that approached Baraka did so cautiously, waiting for a cue from Amal. When she shifted, they adjusted. When she stilled, they froze. "She's leading," Leah said finally. "Not by force, by consent." The realization hit hard. Leadership in this moment wasn't about who was strongest. It was about who understood what needed to be done and who the others trusted to do it. Inside the enclosure, Amal lifted her head and released a longer call. It echoed softly and the troop responded immediately. The lookouts climbed down and took new positions, closer to the ground. The perimeter tightened not aggressively but protectively. Leah frowned. "Leah, they're changing formation." For what, someone asked. She didn't know yet. Baraka's fingers twitched again. His breathing grew erratic, shallow bursts followed by long pauses. Amal's posture changed instantly. She pressed both hands against his chest, now applying pressure in a slow, repeating rhythm. Her arms moved with intention, not strength. She paused, listened, then adjusted again. The control room fell silent. "No," the junior keeper breathed. "She's not." "She is," Leah said quietly. "She's responding to his body." No one had taught her that. No manual described it. And yet the rhythm matched the emergency compression pattern closely enough to make Leah's throat tighten. Not exact, not clinical, but purposeful. The troop did not interfere. When Amal worked, they gave her space. When she paused, one of the juveniles stepped forward, grooming Baraka's arm, stimulating circulation. Another brushed flies away from his eyes. A third dragged leaves closer, arranging them near his side like a nest cushioning the hard ground. It wasn't instinct layered on instinct. It was cooperation. Leah felt something shift inside her, an uncomfortable awareness that what she was witnessing did not fit neatly into any category she had been trained to use. This wasn't just empathy, it was coordination under stress, shaped by shared history and mutual reliance. A sudden movement broke her concentration. The eldest juvenile, Baraka's son, climbed to the highest ledge and beat his chest once. Not loud, not prolonged, just a single resonant strike. Then he turned and looked directly at the glass. Not a challenge, an acknowledgement. Leah's breath caught. He's addressing us. No one laughed. No one dismissed it. The troop held still as if waiting for a response. Leah's mind raced. Protocol screamed caution. Entering the enclosure with a conscious troop was dangerous, potentially fatal. But standing back meant watching Baraka die while his family did everything they could without human help. And they were running out of time. She rewound the feed again, focusing not on Baraka, but on the troops' reactions to the humans. Every time the keepers moved closer to the gate, the gorillas stiffened, but they did not advance. They watched, evaluated. When the humans stopped, the tension eased. "They're not rejecting us," Leah said slowly. "They're deciding." The idea felt absurd, and yet nothing else fit. Baraka groaned again, louder this time, a sound that rippled through the enclosure like electricity. The troop responded with a low chorus of hums and grunts, not chaotic, but layered, harmonized. Amal leaned close, brushing her forehead against his, then resumed her steady rhythm. Leah pressed her palm flat against the console, grounding herself. "This isn't a breakdown," she said. "It's a system. A system built not in minutes but in years, through grooming, through conflict resolved, through bonds, tested and reinforced." In that system, Baraka was not just a leader. He was a center of gravity. And now that gravity was failing. The gorillas were compensating. The room felt heavy with something unspoken. If Leah stepped in too soon, she would shatter that system. If she waited too long, there would be nothing left to save. Inside the enclosure, Amal paused her movements and lifted her head. She looked toward the glass again, not with fear, not with anger, but with something dangerously close to expectation. The silent order held, and for the first time since Baraka fell, it felt like the chaos had not disappeared, but been mastered, reshaped into something fragile and intentional, balanced on the edge between loss and hope. The realization did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, like the moment you understand a door has already closed behind you. Leah stood in the control room, headset loose against her neck, hands braced on the console as the monitors showed what no protocol had prepared her for. Baraka lay on the ground, massive and still, his life hanging by threads that were no longer entirely in human hands. Around him, the troop moved with a certainty that felt older than the zoo, older than the walls, older even than the science meant to explain them. For the first time since the collapse, the humans were no longer directing the situation. They were witnesses. Every instinct Leah had screamed to intervene. Years of training told her that hesitation kills. Seconds matter. Decisions must be made, actions taken. And yet every time her hand drifted toward the gate control, she stopped. Not because she was afraid, but because something inside her recognized the truth before her mind could justify it. If they rushed in now, they would break something they could not repair. Inside the enclosure, Amal lifted her head again. Her earlier urgency had softened into something deliberate, almost ceremonial. She pressed her forehead gently against Baraka's, holding it there for several seconds, her breathing slow and steady. When she pulled back, she released a single low call. The troop responded immediately. It was subtle but unmistakable. The perimeter shifted. The guardians at the edge moved closer to one another. The juveniles withdrew slightly, lowering their bodies, reducing movement. The air inside the enclosure changed, tightening, focusing, as if the entire group had agreed on a single priority. Protect him. At all costs. Leah swallowed hard. They're closing ranks. They think we're the threat, a keeper murmured. No, Leah said softly. They think we don't understand. She watched as one of the younger males took a tentative step toward the gate, stopping well short of it. He didn't display aggression. He didn't beat his chest. He simply stood there looking through the glass with an intensity that made Leah's skin prickle. His gaze wasn't wild. It was searching, measuring. He turned back toward Amal, vocalized once, then retreated. Amal responded with a low grunt and resumed her place beside Baraka. They were communicating, not reacting, not panicking. Communicating. Leah's breath came shallow as she realized the weight of what was happening. In every emergency drill, humans assumed authority, control, command. Animals responded. This moment inverted that hierarchy completely. The gorillas had taken over, and they were doing it better than anyone had expected. Baraka's breathing faltered again, a pause, stretching too long between shallow rises. Amal reacted instantly, adjusting her position, applying pressure again in that steady rhythm. She paused, listened with her whole body, then continued. Her hands moved with care, not force. Each compression looked like a question she was asking his body. Are you still there? The troop leaned in collectively, then stilled as if afraid their presence alone might disrupt him. No one touched Baraka without Amal's implicit permission. When a juvenile crept too close, she turned her head sharply, issuing a quiet warning. The juvenile backed away immediately. Leadership had passed to her without challenge. Leah felt something crack open in her chest. This was not instinct alone. This was trust earned over years of shared life, of quiet moments unseen by visitors and cameras. The humans had charts and data and emergency kits. The gorillas had something else entirely. They had each other. A sudden movement on one monitor caught Leah's eye. The eldest juvenile had climbed down from the ledge and was now dragging a cluster of leaves toward Baraka's side. He arranged them carefully, pushing them closer with the back of his hand until they formed a soft barrier along Baraka's flank. Then he sat back watching. A nest, not for sleep, for comfort. Leah's throat burned. She pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to act, simply to feel useful again. Around her, the room was silent. No one spoke. No one dared reduce what they were seeing to commentary. Minutes stretched. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. Baraka groaned, a sound so faint it barely registered. Amal froze. The troop froze with her. She leaned in, placing her ear against his chest, listening in a way no stethoscope could replicate. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. She answered his groan with a low rumble, something between reassurance and command. Stay. Leah felt tears blur her vision and didn't wipe them away. She realized with a mixture of awe and humility that this moment did not belong to humans. It never had. The protocols, the plans, the authority, all of it had meaning only as long as the gorillas allowed it. A keeper whispered, barely audible, "If he dies." Leah closed her eyes briefly. He won't be alone. The words surprised her as much as anyone. The troop shifted again, creating a wider arc, leaving a narrow corridor of open space near Baraka's head. It wasn't an opening meant for attack. It was too deliberate, too precise. Leah stared at the screen, heart pounding. "They're making room," she said slowly, "for what someone asked." Leah didn't answer right away. She leaned closer, studying Amal's posture. Amal looked toward the glass again, holding the gaze longer this time. Her eyes were steady, not defensive. Then she stepped back half a pace. The corridor remained open. Leah's pulse thundered in her ears. "They're not pushing us away anymore." She took a step toward the door, then stopped. This was the edge of the unknown. No checklist could guide her here. If she misread this moment, the consequences would be catastrophic. She took a breath and did something that went against every emergency instinct she had. She waited. Amal placed her hand once more on Baraka's chest, then withdrew it slowly. She straightened, lifted her head, and released a long, resonant call that vibrated through the enclosure. The troop responded by stepping back together, not fleeing, yielding. The space around Baraka widened, intentional and unmistakable. Leah felt her knees weaken. "They're inviting us." No one spoke. No one argued. In that moment, humans were not in control. They were guests permitted entry by a family guarding their own. Leah's hand hovered over the gate switch, trembling not with fear, but with the gravity of the trust being offered. She understood now that stepping inside was not an assertion of authority. It was a promise to move carefully, to respect what had been done, to help without erasing the love that had carried Baraka this far. She met Amal's gaze through the glass one last time. Then slowly, deliberately, Leah reached for the gate. Baraka did not rise the way kings are supposed to. There was no dramatic surge of strength, no thunderous chest beat announcing victory over death. When he finally came back to himself, it happened quietly, almost apologetically, as if he were afraid of disturbing what had gathered around him in his absence. It began with breath, a deeper one than before, then another. His massive chest, which had barely moved for what felt like an eternity, lifted with purpose. Amal noticed first. She always did. Her head snapped up, eyes fixed on the subtle change no monitor had caught yet. She leaned in, nostrils flaring, listening with her entire body. Baraka's fingers twitched. The troop froze as one. Leah held her breath where she knelt beside him, hands still pressed against his chest, afraid that even relief might break the fragile moment. She felt it under her palms, the rhythm strengthening, the hesitation giving way to intention. Life was returning, not rushing, but choosing to stay. A low sound escaped Baraka's throat. Not a roar, not even a grunt of warning. It was something smaller, a sound of presence. Amal answered immediately. She did not rush him. She did not crowd him. She shifted just enough so that when his eyes fluttered open, the first thing he saw was her. Not the humans, not the lights, not the strange smells of medicine and fear. Her. Baraka blinked slowly, confusion passing through his gaze like a cloud. He tried to move and failed his strength, not yet ready to carry the weight of what he had survived. Amal leaned closer, brushing her forehead against his with a gentleness that contradicted her size. "You are here," the gesture said. "You are not alone." Around them, the troop began to stir, but not with chaos, not with celebration. What unfolded was something far more revealing. The juveniles did not rush forward. The younger males did not test boundaries. Instead, they lowered themselves, bodies angled away, giving Baraka space to re-enter the world on his own terms. One female settled nearby and began grooming the ground beside him, a grounding ritual meant to steady nerves, not assert dominance. They remembered. They remembered who he was, but more importantly, they remembered who he had been to them before he fell. Baraka's breathing steadied, His eyes found Amal again, then slowly traveled beyond her to the curve of bodies, forming a loose semicircle around him. No one stared. No one challenged. They waited. It was the first lesson they had learned together. Power does not need an audience. Minutes passed before Baraka attempted to rise. When he did, it was not dramatic. He shifted his weight, tested one arm, then another. His muscles trembled, betraying the cost his body had paid. Amal moved instinctively to support him, but stopped herself, hovering close without touching. This too was memory. She knew when to guard, and she knew when to let him stand alone. Baraka pushed himself upright, first to his elbows, then to a seated position. The world seemed to tilt around him. The troop leaned in collectively, not to restrain him, but to anchor him. A juvenile let out a soft whine, cut short by a low corrective sound from an older female. Quiet. Baraka lifted his head. He did not look for the highest rock. He did not beat his chest. He did not remind anyone who ruled. Instead, he looked for faces. He found them one by one, recognition flickering behind his eyes. Amal, the older females, the son who had stood watch, the juveniles who had brought leaves and formed barriers. Each gaze lingered as if he were taking inventory of something precious he had nearly lost. Then he did something no one expected. Baraka leaned forward and touched the ground with his knuckles, bowing his head not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The gesture was subtle, easily missed by anyone looking for spectacle. But the troop understood it instantly. A ripple passed through them, a release of tension so profound it was almost visible. Shoulders dropped, breathing synchronized. One by one they approached, not to challenge, not to test, but to reconnect. A young female brushed his arm lightly as she passed. Another paused to groom his shoulder for just a moment before moving away. His eldest son approached last, stopping a few feet away. They locked eyes. Baraka held the gaze steady and calm. The son lowered his head. It was not a transfer of power. It was something deeper, an understanding forged in the space between collapse and survival. Leah watched from a distance, now having retreated beyond the gate once Baraka was stable. She knew better than to intrude on what came next. The humans had done their part. What followed belonged to the troop. Over the next days, Baraka did not reclaim his old rhythms. He no longer climbed the highest structures. He walked slower. He rested more. And the troop adapted without friction, without confusion. They remembered what mattered. When he paused, they paused. When he lay down, they arranged themselves around him, not as guards this time, but as companions. The youngest juveniles learned to play farther from him, careful not to overwhelm. Amal stayed close but not possessive, her presence a constant reassurance rather than a shield. Leadership changed shape. It became quieter, more distributed, less about display and more about continuity. Visitors returned eventually, their voices softer, now their cameras lowered more often than raised. A small sign near the enclosure explained the medical emergency in careful, factual language. It could not explain what had truly happened. What the troop had remembered when Baraka rose again was not dominance. It was belonging. They remembered that strength is not proven when everything is under control, but when it is lost and others choose to hold you up anyway. They remembered that leadership is not about standing tallest, but about being the one others gather around when the ground gives way. Baraka lived, but more than that, the troop changed. And long after the bruises faded and the emergency protocols were filed away, something invisible remained in the enclosure, a quiet knowledge shared between them, that when one falls, they do not scatter. They stay. What lingered after everything had settled was not the image of a giant silverback collapsing, nor the shock that rippled through the crowd in that first terrible moment. What stayed was something quieter, heavier, and far more difficult to explain. It was the realization that in a space designed for observation and control, the most profound act of leadership, loyalty, and intelligence came not from human hands, but from a group of guerrillas who understood exactly what was happening and chose how to respond. This story forces us to confront a truth that is both humbling and uncomfortable. Strength is not always loud, and authority is not always about dominance. When Baraka fell, the troop did not dissolve into chaos. They did not fight for position. They did not flee from vulnerability. Instead, they organized, they guarded, they waited. In those moments, they revealed a form of social intelligence that goes far beyond instinct. They demonstrated memory trust, restraint, and care qualities we often reserve for ourselves when we talk about what makes humans unique. One of the most powerful lessons here is the meaning of leadership. Baraka was a dominant male feared and respected, but when his body failed him, the troop did not abandon him because his power was gone. They protected him because of who he had been to them. Leadership in its truest form is not proven when you stand tall on the highest rock. It is revealed when you fall and others choose to stand for you. That choice made silently and collectively is what transformed this incident from a medical emergency into a story that will be remembered for years. There is also a lesson in restraint. The gorillas did not attack the humans. They did not lash out in panic. They held a boundary not to exclude help, but to ensure it came at the right moment. In doing so, they showed something remarkable in understanding that intervention can be dangerous if trust is broken. When the time came, they did not need force or fear. They stepped back as if granting permission. That moment challenges our assumption that animals act only on impulse. It suggests instead that they are capable of judgment, of patience, and of decision-making rooted in relationship rather than reaction. Perhaps the most moving message of all is about compassion. In the wild, weakness is often punished. Yet here weakness was surrounded, sheltered, and carried emotionally, if not physically, by those who recognized its meaning. Compassion was not a deviation from nature. It was part of it. The troop's response reminds us that care is not something added on top of survival. In many cases, it is survival. For us watching from behind glass, this story becomes a mirror. How do we respond when someone near us collapses emotionally, physically, or spiritually? Do we scatter, argue, assign blame? Or do we circle, protect, and hold space until help arrives? Baraka's story does not ask us to romanticize animals or diminish human knowledge. It asks us to widen our understanding of intelligence, empathy, and connection. If this story moved you, it is because it touched something deeply familiar, the need to belong, to be protected when we are most vulnerable, and to know that our value does not disappear when our strength does. That is a message worth carrying beyond this single moment, beyond this single enclosure. If you believe stories like this matter, stories that remind us that the world is more connected, more compassionate, and more intelligent than we often assume, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows us to continue sharing moments that challenge, inspire, and reconnect us with the deeper truths of life. Together, we can keep telling the stories that remind us what it truly means to stand by one another when it matters most.